Today we are going to discuss about Jane Austen's famous novel Emma. Before we start discussing about Emma, we will be discussing about Jane Austen, the author of the novel. Jane Austen, she was a literary genius and she was universally acknowledged by other literary writers. Her novel were being considered as one of the greatest novels, that is, Emma is being considered as one of the masterpieces in the 19th century English literature. Essentially, romances, the novels are sharply observed beautifully because it was written in a way like we can understand that it was included with a lot of realism and also wit. As a result of that, Emma was being considered as one of the most accomplished work of Jane Austen. And in 1996, the same novel was adapted into a film. And now we will be looking at Jane Austen's six major novels. The first one was Sense and Sensibility. It was published in the year 1811. The next one was Pride and Prejudice. It was published in the year 1813. And Mansfield Park, it was published in the year 1814. And Emma was published in the year 1816. And other works were Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, which were published in 1818 posthumously after her death. And these books were popular because it was able to achieve a public figure, or it was able to influence the society of Jane Austen's time. Now we will be looking at the various characters found in Emma, the novel written by Jane Austen. So the first character is Emma Woodhouse. Emma Woodhouse is the main protagonist of the novel Emma itself. So Emma is being quoted as handsome, clever and rich, and she is a 21-year-old daughter of a wealthy gentleman who is accustomed to having her own way and cursed with a disposition to think a little too well of herself. So she is introduced as a very young girl, and in the introductory part of the novel we can understand she was having not that experience, she was not having greater experience about life as a character, and in the beginning stages she was immature. Slowly she understands things by doing a lot of activities for other characters. The first activity was matchmaking, and whenever she do matchmaking, she did it with well intention. And what we can understand is that as the novel progresses, all these matchmakings between different characters help her to grow mature, and she becomes a very clever young woman. And it was being seen that she is being considered to be the more modest and considerate woman. And this shows that how women were during the time of Jane Austen. The next character is Mr. Woodhouse, who is the father of Emma, and he is a very wealthy man and possessed of large estate, Hartfield. And this estate was isolated, and Mr. Woodhouse has few enjoyments. Although he dotes on Emma, he also indulges her more selfish tendencies and is largely unpleasant. His complaints and lack of activity make him appear a much older man than he actually is. The next character is Miss Anne Weston. So she was Emma's governess who essentially raised Emma after her mother died. At the beginning of the book, she marries Mr. Weston, a somewhat older gentleman. So Miss Weston is an exemplar for Emma, modest and self-possessed, but still fails to see many of the faults in Emma that Mr. Knightley tries to correct through the novel. Now comes the next main important character, that is Mr. George Knightley, and he is a very sensible man, and he is at the age of 37. And we can understand that his brother John Knightley had married Emma's elder sister Isabella. And George Knightley is being presented as a very courteous, decent, noble, sincere and intelligent character, where we can find out that he is playing a major role in influencing Emma as a character. And George Knightley, the major quality of George Knightley is he is having a lot of intuition about other characters, and he always suspects about other characters, and whatever information he gives about other characters to Emma will finally end up in argument. And these informations were given by George Knightley because he was having a greater interest towards Emma. And what we can understand is that George Knightley, in the end of the novel, finally married Emma itself. Harriet Smith, the next character, and she is a short, plump, and a fair girl of 17. She is of somewhat dubious origin. Emma is mostly responsible for bringing Harriet into Highbury society and constantly instructs and advises her, although not always to her benefit. And what we can understand is that Emma fills Harriet Smith with a pretension that is appropriate for her status. In the end, she marries Mr. Martin, a farmer that Emma considers to coarse and rough, but is more appropriate in status for Harriet. Frank Churchill is another character who is very wicked. He makes use of Emma to get married to Jane Fairfax. And he was the son of Mr. Weston. He was brought up by his uncle, the Churchills, who was settled in London. Highbury society was eagerly anticipating his visit to his newly married father, but he consistently delays. Frank Churchill is somewhat shallow, more interested in pursuing pleasure than any concrete pursuits, but he is also handsome and charming enough to attract Emma. He is secretly engaged to Jane Fairfax but cannot reveal this because the aunt who raised him would strenuously object. Jane Fairfax, she is an orphan, the only child of Miss Bates' youngest daughter. Upon her mother's death, she was taken in Colonel Campbell, who served with her father in the army. The same age is Emma. She is equally talented, charming, and well regarded, a fact that quite vexes Emma. She is secretly engaged to Frank Churchill. Mr. Philip Elton, he is playing a very minor role. In the introductory part of the novel, we can see that Mr. Elton is proposing to Emma, but that becomes a failure. Later, he leaves Highbury and gets married to Augusta Hawkins. Next character is Mrs. Elton, and she is the daughter of a Bristol merchant who marries Mr. Elton. Her status in the society rests only on the fact that her sister married very well, and her behavior when she arrives at Highbury is presumptuous, arrogant, and rude. She refuses to treat others with proper respect they are accorded, including Mr. Knightley. Miss Bates, the daughter of Mrs. Bates, and Miss Bates is neither young, married, handsome, or rich. She lacks any distinguishing trait such as intellect or cleverness, yet is generally happy and treats others with great goodwill. Emma's cruel treatment of Miss Bates during the picnic at Box Hill is one of the turning points of the novel. Mr. Weston, the older man that Miss Taylor marries, Mr. Weston had been married much earlier. From this marriage, he had a son, Frank Churchill, whom he sent away to be raised by his late wife's relatives. He is from a respectable family that has been progressively moving up in society and amassed a modest fortune. Robert Martin, his profession is a farmer, and what you can understand, he lives in Mr. Knightley's estate. Emma is convinced that Harriet to reject his first proposal of marriage because she believes that he is too rough and he is not having the right status. He marries Harriet at the end of the novel. Now we will be discussing about various themes which will be discussed in this novel. And various themes which will be discussed in this novel are love, courtship, marriage, character development, moral integrity, and social conduct, money, marriage, social status, oppression of women, miscommunication, and moral relativism. So coming back to the first theme, that is love, courtship, and marriage. So there are a lot of characters, or there are a lot of events which will definitely make few characters to come together and to love each other. The first one was Mr. Elton, and he will make a proposal towards Emma, but it will be a failure. Later you can find out he will be marrying Augusta Hawkins. And mainly we can find out the love, courtship, and marriage, the themes, it is actually getting established or implemented with the characters like Emma and Mr. George Knightley, then Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. All these characters are involved, or these themes are actually centrally connected with these characters. Then coming back to character development, we can understand the main protagonist, Emma, is being developed in each and every chapter, and she realizes in each and every chapter after every foolish things she does in her life. And what we can understand, she is our heroine, she is having or she is just reflecting on what all things she had done. Especially in the case of matchmaking. Every matchmaking she does for Harriet Smith, it ends up in a failure, and that gives her a kind of guilt feeling, and she tries to console Harriet Smith. Now coming back to moral integrity, this theme can be mostly connected with the main character Frank Churchill, where you can understand that this character is not that morally integrated because he was not able to connect with the society of Highbury. And what we can understand is that he is actually moving away from moral values because he is actually wicked. He is making use of other characters to achieve his pleasure. And later we can find out that his social conduct was not being approved by the society. Then Oppression of Women is another main character where you can see that in the novel it is based on two characters we can understand about the oppression of women, that is through Emma and Harriet Smith. On one side, Emma is being presented as a woman who is just claiming for a lot of rights and freedom. And the other side, Harriet Smith, she is again being presented as a character who was being dominated by the patriarchy. And there are a lot of miscommunication that happens between the characters, especially between George Knightley and Emma, and also between Harriet Smith and Robert Martin. And also as a result of their matchmaking, we can understand that other minor characters are also benefited out of them. Then moral relativism. So doing matchmaking by Emma, it is also being connected with moral relativism. She always tried to look at the moral values of people, moral values of characters. Again, social status of various characters are also brought in here, or it can be connected with the characters, and all these themes actually are being controlled by Emma, and Jane Austen is trying to tell about or convey about all these themes, messages through the main protagonist. And what we can understand, this novel, it is actually written to just tell about, or it is also giving a wider picture about what was the society or what kind of society was there during the time of Jane Austen.